Köszöntöm éjszakai híradónk nézőit. Göncz Árpád köztársasági elnök mai munkanapját a rendőrség munkájának tanulmányozásával töltötte.
A köztársasági elnök délelőtt az országos, valamint a budapesti rendőrfőkapitányság vezetőivel tárgyalt. A vendéglátók megmutatták, hogyan vethetők be rendőrkutyák randalírozó futballrajongók és gépkocsi feltörők ártalmatlanítására. Délután a rendőri ezred munkájával ismerkedett Göncz Árpád. Megtekintette a tömegmegmozdulások megfékezésére kiképzett különleges alakulat bemutatóját, a rendőrkommandó lövészeti gyakorlatát. Az állománygyűlésen a vezetők elmondták, hogy a rendőrség anyagi tartalékai kimerültek. Ebben az évben fizetésemelést nem kaptak. Pintér Sándor országos főkapitány bejelentette, hogy októbertől 2000 forint állományi pótlékemelés lesz. A köztársasági elnök látogatásának tapasztalatait összegezve kiemelte.
Meggyőződésem, hogy az ország közérzetének javításával együtt és biztonsági érzetének javításával együtt az ország alkotmányos rendjét is egy depolitizált, vagy legalábbis nem depolitizált, de pártoktól független rendőrség nagy mértékben tudja növelni. Szinte a belső biztonság legfontosabb pszichikai és biztonsági záloga.
Az ENSZ biztonsági tanácsa aggodalmát fejezte ki amiatt, hogy Szerbiában két szervezet továbbra is akadályozza a nemzetközi hajózást a Dunán.
Ennek előzményeként Erdős André, Magyarország ENSZ nagykövete levelet juttatott el a biztonsági tanácshoz, amelyben felhívta a figyelmet arra, hogy bizonyos szerbiai csoportok július óta folyamatosan akadályozzák a hajózást a Duna jugoszláv szakaszán. A jugoszláv hatóságok, mutatott rá a magyar ENSZ diplomata, semmit sem tesznek a torlaszok felszámolásáért. Mi több, a Duna egyezményt nyíltan megsértve illetéket szednek be az áthaladni szándékozó hajóktól. A biztonsági tanács elnöki nyilatkozata elítéli a jugoszláv hatóságok elnéző magatartását, és a nemzetközi kötelezettségek megsértésének minősíti azt, hogy Szerbiában illetéket vetnek ki a Dunán áthaladó hajókra.
Belgrád még nem reagált a biztonsági tanács nyilatkozatára, de részletesen ismertették Jugoszlávia ENSZ nagykövetének Magyarország ellenes állásfoglalását.
Dragomir Gyakic, Jugoszlávia ENSZ képviselője levelet küldött Butrozgáli ENSZ főtitkárnak, amelyben egyenesen azt állítja, hogy Jeszenszky Géza magyar külügyminiszter New Yorkban az ENSZ közgyűlés ülésszakán elmondott beszédében hamisítások hangzottak el. A jugoszláv diplomata ismételten felhánytorgatta az úgynevezett Kalasnyikov ügyet, sőt, ezt újabbal toldotta meg, amikor azt állította, hogy Magyarország még repülőgépeket szállít Horvátországnak. Dragomir Gyakic Jeszenszkynek azt a kijelentését is cáfolni igyekezett, amely szerint egyre nagyobb nyomás nehezedik a vajdasági nemzeti kisebbségekre, így a magyarokra. A belgrádi ENSZ diplomata nem egyebet állított, mint azt, hogy Jugoszláviában a legmesszebb menőkig betartják a kisebbségi jogokat.
Pozsonyban tanácskoztak a Dunamenti Tartományok Szövetségének vezetői. Hazánkat Budapest főpolgármestere és a Dunamenti megyék elnökei képviselték.
A tanácskozáson a legnagyobb felháborodást az a szerb intézkedés váltotta ki, amely vámot vett ki a Dunán közlekedő hajókra. A konferencia felszólította a szerb köztársaságot ennek haladéktalan megszüntetésére és a dunai blokkád felszámolására. A résztvevőket dunai hajókirándulásra invitálták. Bőség a Duna elterelésről, illetve az erőmű előnyeiről tartott számukra előadást Julius Binder vezérigazgató. Mint megtudtuk, Dunacsúlynál már kijelölték a Dunakilitit kiváltó hajózsilip helyét. Első ízben járt a csatornában Vladimir Mecsiár kormányfő. Mint híradónknak elmondta, a létesítmény szerinte nem a kommunista gigantománia, hanem sokkal inkább a technika fejlődésének példája. Az alkalmat felhasználva bejelentette azt is, hogy még az év végéig megoldódik a kétnyelvű helységnévtáblák ügye Szlovákiában.
Gazdaság. Tőkehiány idején pénz vagy áruhitelre van szüksége a vállalkozónak. Ez utóbbi esetén a bank garanciát követel, mert több milliárdos áruhitelezési csalás nehezíti a helyzetüket.
Gazdasági recesszió idején, amikor egyre másra halljuk, hogy nincs pénz a vállalkozásra, nincs pénz hitelezésre, hogyan lehet áru garanciát biztosítani?
Recesszió idején nagyon jól fogalmazta, nagyon veszélyes és kockázatos hitelezni, ez a hitelezés nehéz ipara.
Mondjuk én vállalkozó vagyok, és az innovációs kamarához elmegyek, ő hitelt nekem nem tud adni, egy bank igen. Viszont a bank garanciát szeretne, és nekem csak árum van. Innentől kezdve mit csinálok?
A fedezet magában az áruban fekszik. Mi meg tudjuk fogalmazni a bankok számára, hogy hogyan, milyen körülmények között fogadja el az ominózus árukészletet fedezetként, és ebben az esetben az ő kockázata minimalizálódik, miközben a vállalkozó mozgástere megmarad. Bűncselekmények ellen még mi se tudunk biztosítékokat adni a bankok részére, de olyan hatással van a vállalkozókra az, hogy mi mindennapos ellenőrzést végzünk, hogy sokkal nehezebben valósítanak meg ilyen cselekményeket.
Még mindig maradunk a bankoknál, illetve a 92 milliós óbudai bankrablásnál.
Ma 15 óra 35 perckor a budapesti rendőrfőkapitányság rablási adosztálya az ORFK különleges szolgálatával együttműködve a 17. kerületben elfogta Mezei Istvánt, akit a bankrablás ügyében köröztünk, és feltételezhető, hogy a pénz elrejtésében és a bűncselekmény egyéb elkövetésében közreműködött.
Mezei a kommandóakció során nem tanúsított ellenállást, sem fegyver nem volt nála, sem pedig a Budapest banktól elrabolt 91 millió forint. A rendőrség gyanúsítottja a kommandóakció után átkerült a BRFK vizsgálati osztályára. A kihallgatások előtt azonban orvosi vizsgálaton kell még átesnie. Kovács Zoltán, mint feltételezett negyedik elkövető, továbbra is szökésben van. A korábban közített fényképtől eltérően mostanra akár 1-1,5 centiméteres haja is lehet. Simon Tamás alezredes szerint az előzetes feltételezésektől eltérően kiterjedtebb ügyről van szó, így nincs kizárva, hogy további gyanúsítottak kerülnek rendőrkézre.
Végül az időjárásról. A napsütés mellett felhőzetre is számíthatunk. A hőmérséklet 18-23 fok között várható, elszórtan eső is lesz. Ezzel híradónk végére értünk. Köszönöm figyelmüket, jó éjszakát!
Hello, this is the BBC World Service News at 13 hours GMT. I'm Verity Spencer. The headlines. After 4 months of hiding, the Somali faction leader, General Aidid, breaks cover to announce the release of 2 UN prisoners. Guilty verdicts in the murder trial of Chris Hani, the South African communist politician. And the Cambodian leadership warns Thailand not to help the Khmer Rouge in attacks on Cambodian villages. General Aidid's faction in Somalia have released 2 prisoners they've been holding, a Nigerian and an American soldier. The release came just an hour after General Aidid told journalists from his hiding place in Mogadishu that there'd be an unconditional release in response to American peace efforts. The general also expressed concern that further US reinforcements will be seen as a provocation by the Somali people.
Looking tired and worn, but otherwise just as he had when he disappeared into the back streets of the city 4 months ago, General Aidid seemed relieved to be able to announce what he clearly considered a generous and statesmanlike gesture.
Respecting and rewarding the international opinion which supported and voiced to the peaceful solutions of the Somali crisis, decided to release the 2 prisoners of war held by SNA supporters.
The prisoners would be free within an hour, he said, and he was as good as his word. Mike Durant, the American pilot, was carried on a stretcher as he and the Nigerian, who's been a prisoner for 6 weeks, were handed over to the International Red Cross and representatives of the Ethiopian and Eritrean governments and driven to the American compound in the city. General Aidid himself still isn't free. He's still officially on a UN wanted list, and despite the signs of goodwill from Washington, he wants a clear signal from the UN that he's out of danger too. The Americans made their request and General Aidid has granted it. Now he says it's up to the Americans to keep their side of the bargain, forcing the UN to readmit him to the political process and sorting out a peace settlement for Somalia. Roger Hearing, BBC News, Mogadishu.
2 guilty verdicts have been returned at the Chris Hani murder trial in Johannesburg. Mr. Hani, a prominent South African communist, was shot dead outside his home in April. Janusz Valus, a right-wing extremist, and Clive Derby-Lewis, a conservative politician, were found guilty of killing with intent. But gay Derby-Lewis was acquitted of all charges.
For the crowds that have gathered daily around the courthouse, the judgment came sooner than expected. Once defence lawyers admitted they had difficulty contesting prosecution evidence. Among those in court for today's verdict, Hani's widow Limfo, and her husband's closest friend, Tokyo Sehwali, leader of the ANC's Johannesburg region, who brought Hani's daughter with him. The court, sealed off by the security forces from crowds demanding the death sentence for political assassination, was packed as Mr. Justice Elof said Walus, a Polish immigrant driven by contempt for communism, had gunned down Hani at his home 6 months ago with intent to kill. The court accepted that the weapon used, a 9mm pistol like this, was supplied to Walus by Clive Derby-Lewis, a prominent Conservative Party activist, a member of President de Klerk's All-Party Advisory Council. The judge said Derby-Lewis knowingly and by conspiracy with Walus promoted the assassination of Hani. Derby-Lewis's wife Gay was accused of supplying a hit list of other would-be victims, including Nelson Mandela, but the court found her not guilty of all charges. The 7-day trial, following one of the biggest murder investigations South Africa has seen, has been monitored daily by senior ANC activists like Cyril Ramaphosa and Joe Slovo, whose name was also on the alleged hit list. The ANC argue that Hani's death and the trial evidence confirmed the determination of right-wing whites to undermine South Africa's transition to democracy. John Harrison, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Earlier, we spoke to the former South African MP and anti-apartheid campaigner, Helen Suzman. We asked her if a white extremist backlash could follow the ruling.
Well, there is a far-right faction in South Africa that should not be ignored, and they have arms, they know how to use them, and they quite enjoy using them, so one can't dismiss them entirely, and obviously they are against any reform which will lead to the establishment of a non-racial democracy with a black majority government.
About 120 miners are trapped in a gold mine in South Africa following the collapse of a mine shaft on Wednesday. Today, rescue teams were able to bring 40 miners to the surface. An official for the owner of the mine in Western Transvaal said the condition of those still trapped is not known because communication links were damaged during the collapse. The UN Security Council has given the authorities in Haiti until Monday to comply with its demands for the return of the exiled president Jean-Bertrand Aristide and the restoration of democracy. If the military leadership fails to abide by an accord reached in July, the full range of sanctions will be applied. Earlier this week, violent disturbances in Haiti prevented the arrival of UN troops from America and Canada.
It was on Monday that armed demonstrators prevented the docking of American and Canadian troops whose mission was to help the United Nations restore democracy. When the American ship sailed away, the demonstrations ended. But the leader of the Haitian military, General Raoul Cedras, has now cast doubt on whether he'll stand down on Friday, as originally agreed. The United Nations reaction has been swift. From the blocking of the American troops, the Security Council took only 2 days to reimpose sanctions. And there have been tough warnings from the Americans to the military and police leaders in Haiti.
Mr. President, the day will come when democratic rule is restored to Haiti. The Governor's Island Agreement sought to ensure that transition would be peaceful, that recriminations would be minimal, and that amnesty would be given to those who illegally ousted a democratically elected president. General Cedras and Police Chief Francois have chosen a perilous, self-defeating, and dishonorable course.
And while the new sanctions may bring even tougher times for the people of Haiti, they've been welcomed by President Aristide's supporters, who say they're necessary to remove tyranny from Haiti.
I foresee General Cedras and the whole military high command and Colonel Francois leaving their current position.
President Aristide himself is still in Washington, and his planned return to Haiti on October the 30th is looking increasingly unlikely. As for the United Nations, after the debacle in Somalia, and partly as a result of it, another mission is falling rapidly into disarray. John Lyne, BBC News at the United Nations.
And you're watching the BBC World Service News. Coming up, in the cutting room, China's censors clash with the new generation of filmmakers. That's after the break. One of Cambodia's co-premiers, Hun Sen, has said he was prepared to go to the United Nations Security Council if it was proved that Thailand was helping the Khmer Rouge to launch attacks against the National Army. Hun Sen's comments follow allegations that Thailand's army has been supplying the Khmer Rouge. There's been renewed fighting in northern Cambodia, with government forces moving against the Khmer Rouge stronghold of An Long Veng, close to the Thai border.
This is all that remains of the government-controlled village of Osmak after an attack by Khmer Rouge forces on Sunday. Rebel troops had already taken other villages, but government forces claim to have repulsed the attack here. Villagers have been fleeing the wreckage of their homes and crossing over a precarious bridge into the relative safety of Thailand, where the main refugee camps have long since closed. The Khmer Rouge aim has been to gain land in advance of possible round-table talks with the government and to relieve pressure on their stronghold at An Long Veng. The Cambodian military has accused the Thai army of supplying the Khmer Rouge forces with tanks and anti-aircraft artillery, a claim which has been strenuously denied by the Thai army. The Cambodian leadership has been assured by the Thai foreign minister that his government was not supporting the Khmer Rouge. Hun Sen has said he will believe it until he receives proof otherwise, and then he would seek to resolve any dispute through diplomatic rather than military means. As Cambodia begins the long process of reconstruction, the future role of the Khmer Rouge is apparently still to be decided by both negotiation and military means. Jonathan Chapman, BBC News.
Italian police have launched a nationwide anti-mafia swoop. They've arrested at least 130 suspected members of the syndicate following a wave of crime in northern Italy. Milan and Venice were the major cities targeted. Switzerland is said to have cooperated by releasing hundreds of documents on private bank accounts. Israel and the PLO negotiators have been continuing their talks on how to implement their agreement on interim Palestinian self-rule in the occupied territories. The Joint Committee is drawing up an agenda for 2 months of detailed negotiations. The meeting in the Egyptian Red Sea resort of Taba has been discussing the fate of thousands of Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails. There's pressure from the Palestinians to release the majority of the prisoners, given that the PLO has halted military operations against Israel. The German health minister, Horst Seehofer, has ordered a shake-up of health administration following the scandal over HIV-contaminated blood supplies. Allegations that nearly 400 people may have contracted AIDS after receiving infected blood emerged last week. 2 German health officials were sacked for failing to pass on the information.
Under pressure to resign, Mr. Seehofer has moved to quell public anxiety over the issue of infected blood. He proposed the dissolution of the Federal Health Agency, bringing the control of blood supplies under the Central Health Ministry, and the setting up of an independent committee to review the treatment of haemophiliacs during the 1980s. But Mr. Seehofer and his officials at the Health Ministry have already had to answer criticism in Parliament that they failed to act soon enough. The compulsory screening of blood for HIV infection only began in 1985. And critics say the health minister himself must have been aware of the problem earlier than last week. The recent scandal in France, where more than 2,000 haemophiliacs contracted HIV through contaminated blood, has contributed to the scare. A number of French health officials were convicted of criminal negligence. Allegations of a cover-up in France have been echoed in Germany by the organisation representing the country's 3,000 registered haemophiliacs, who predicted that the German scandal was likely to reach far greater proportions.
China has eased trading restrictions with Taiwan to allow limited non-governmental trade. Civilian trade has been banned since 1949. The new rules allow businesses to import or export goods of up to $200,000. Only goods made in Taiwan can be imported into China. The Chinese government hopes the new measures will help to stop smuggling. China's second city, Shanghai, is striving to give Chinese film a prominent place on the world map. However, the authorities in Beijing are uncomfortable with some of the issues being addressed in the new cinema. As our Asia correspondent, Brian Barron, reports from Shanghai, problems of censorship are hindering the industry's progress.
In a borrowed office in Shanghai, a feature film is underway. But if the stars and camera team seem a little edgy, that's because a 30% pay cut has been imposed this week as the Shanghai Film Studio struggles to stay afloat. What a contrast to the big spending style of one of America's top directors, Oliver Stone, who's in Shanghai as a judge in the International Film Festival.
It's necessary for filmmakers to come to China. You don't boycott it. You come and you talk, you have a dialogue. You meet people in the street. You create a human dialogue between people. That's the only way art can work. And then when art works, politics follow.
But plans for a feature film on the late Chairman Mao, revolutionary China's founder, have fallen apart because of the communist authorities' reluctance to lay bare the paranoid past. Though government censorship is not on the film festival agenda here, it's already adversely affected what's shown. China's own official entry, selected by the Beijing authorities, is a tedious piece of party propaganda. In fact, this isn't the top-of-the-line production that was originally scheduled. But government censorship intervened. The film that was originally favoured, a serious production called The Soul of the Woman Painter, had some nude scenes in it. For that reason, and because of a dispute with the Taiwanese who financed it, the film authorities in effect banned it. But Shanghai is committed to revitalising its film industry. Like all of China's big studios, it's hamstrung by Beijing's cultural commissars, whose list of forbidden films grows longer and longer. Brian Barron, BBC News, Shanghai.
And that's the international news. Stay with us for the business news after the break.
US trade negotiator Mickey Cantor has been meeting with his European community counterparts Leon Britton and Jacques Delors. In their second day of talks, the men have been trying to overcome differences in agriculture and other trade issues which are stalling the GATT talks. But there are fears that those differences will not be ironed out in time for next month's deadline, as Jonathan Urquhart reports.
US Trade Representative Mickey Cantor refused to comment after the morning meetings, but is due to meet at least one French government minister later on Thursday. The French have been threatening to delay a GATT deal further by refusing to accept a deal, the Blair House Accord, struck between the EC and US last year, which would cut subsidized farm exports. They came up with a compromise by proposing a partial agreement is made, spinning off agriculture from the main talks, so that at least some progress is made in time for the December the 15th deadline. However, this has been rejected by most of the negotiating nations, and meanwhile the US continue to refuse to reopen the Blair House Accord talks. Failure to reach a GATT deal by the already extended deadline is likely to result in a flurry of protectionist reactions around the globe, while economists predict that success could pump around $213 billion a year into the ailing world economy.
Shares of Japanese video games manufacturers have fallen in the Nikkei in Japan. Sellers have become concerned that business prospects may be worse than expected. Nintendo, Sega and Konami were all fallers. Nintendo slashed its earnings forecast on Tuesday due to slow sales at home and overseas. China is to invite foreign management to run its new domestic airport in Zhuhai Special Economic Zone next door to Macau. The airport is due to open next year and will be the first to be run by outside expertise. On markets now, London stocks fell despite the fact that September unemployment figures came in better than expected. Dealers had interpreted this as lessening the chances of an early base rate cut, so the FTSE is now off 2 points, it's picked up slightly now at 3,079. While sterling was encouraged by the news and is now sitting against the dollar at 152.35. In the US, the number of Americans filing new claims for unemployment benefit rose last week, but retail sales edged just 0.1% higher in September, better than expected. Wall Street stocks are therefore expected to open slightly higher. And finally, in India, Bombay brokers have decided to continue their indefinite strike for a second day. The action, which has halted trading, is in protest of the government's lack of action related to seizure of scandal-linked shares.
Now a reminder of the main news. General Aidid's faction in Somalia has freed 2 UN soldiers they've been holding, an American and a Nigerian. The release came shortly after General Aidid had told journalists from his hiding place in Mogadishu that the 2 men would be released unconditionally in response to American peace efforts. The Nigerian soldier has been injured and is being treated in hospital. A South African